What's up, beautiful people? Welcome back, kings and queens, to Building Backwards, a journey back to our roots. And so today, we're going to talk about what we're supposed to be doing right now for the spring and summer garden. I know that the hardest part for me was getting started, knowing when to get started. When I was ready to get started, what do I need to do? And so that's what we're going to talk about today: starting seeds, buying plant starts, planning out your garden, all those good things that we should be focusing on today, right now, January. Before we get started, I do want to just thank everybody for your continued support. Thank you all for liking, sharing, subscribing, following on different social media platforms. I thank you for helping to grow this community so there could be more people that look like us on these big platforms, getting brand deals and having mainstream audience viewing us. So I thank you all so much for your continued support. I thank you all for continuing to shop at shoprrva.com, which is the merch store. Again, that is shoprrva.com. And I'm adding things on a continuous basis. Sometimes you might see things pop up and then go away because I want to make sure that I'm getting you guys the best possible quality. I am a big person on principle. And so if it's not going to be top quality, if it's not going to be good business ethics, I don't want to put my name on it. So thank y'all for your continued support. Thank you for being patient. I know that I haven't gotten a consistent flow of this podcast and streaming and posting, but I'm working on it, y'all. Send me a message, drop a line, let me know that you're here. I try to respond to comments as much as possible on the different platforms. So continue to talk to me, okay? So let's get started on today's episode. Today, we are going to talk first about the definitions of some of these words I'm going to be using because I know that can be a little bit intimidating, confusing. But then I start to talking and you don't know what I'm talking about. So we're going to start with definitions. So seed starting. Obviously, that's a little bit more self-explanatory. That means you're just going to get some seeds and start that plant. Germination. So when you get that seed, you want it to sprout. That is the germination process. And different seeds have different germination time frames. You can germinate by using the wet paper towel method, which I was never successful at. Siri talking to me. I won't talking to her. You can use the wet paper towel method, which is just basically taking a wet paper towel, putting it in a Ziploc bag or a plastic container, and keeping it moist, of course, and letting that seed sprout there. I was terrible at that method because you do have to watch it. And I would go days and forget that I did that, and it would just be a hot mess. I like to start my seeds or germinate my seeds in seed starting trays, which are there are different kinds, but they're basically these trays that you can sit soil in. So you'll use something like potting soil or seed starting mix, and you can put the seeds in there, make sure they're nice and moist. Kind of use some type of plastic to keep in the humidity up or the moisture up until that seed sprouts, and then you take that plastic off, and then you'll have your seedlings. Seedlings are just the small version of the plant that you're trying to grow. It is the baby plant. You can actually buy seed starts, which are just the seedlings that you didn't have to start from seed. You didn't have to germinate. You can just go and pick them up. They have them at the garden centers and most big box stores, such as like Walmart, Lowe's, Tractor Supply, Ace Hardware. Some feed stores might even have like these greenhouses that you may see with some started plants. You can also go to things like nurseries, and they might have some started plants. And those are a lot easier to maintain because they've already been acclimated to the environment. They already have kind of some strong root systems, and you don't have to baby them as much as you do with brand new seed starts that you started yourself. So that is an option. Another good thing that a lot of people don't know is if you get any type of state assistance for food, like food stamps, if you go to somewhere like Walmart or even like Food Lion and Publix and places that have vegetable seeds or vegetable plant starts, you can purchase those with those benefits and you get more for your benefits, because I can go to the store and buy one cucumber for, 60 cents, or I can go and get a whole pack of 50 seeds for cucumbers and grow my own. And they'll be like $2.50 for the pack. So it's a way to make your money stretch or your benefits stretch. Just a little FYI. But a reason that I might get plant starts versus starting from seed is because I ran out of time to start from seed. So right now, if I wanted to get a good spring garden going, I could go and get some plant starts and put them in the ground right now for things like cabbage and Brussels sprouts, broccoli, cauliflower, kale and mustard greens or collard greens. Those frost hardy vegetables that can grow in the spring, and you can get a good harvest before it gets really hot and those plants decide to die. So now let's talk about planting your garden, because that's very important to do right now, especially if you want to get the best possible result. If you want to get your desired harvest, you want to plan your garden so that you're not overgrowing, undergrowing, not missing deadlines, and so forth. When planting your garden, you first want to plan what you're going to grow. Look at what you and your family eat. Don't just grow anything and everything unless you're doing it to sell or for the beauty of the garden and you don't really care whether you waste it or if you're giving it to someone else or whatever. If you are doing this to feed your family, think about what your family actually eats. And I say that because my first year gardening, I grew a bunch of cucumbers. We eat some cucumbers, but we don't eat that many cucumbers. We eat some pickles, but we don't eat that many pickles. And I had 5-gallon buckets full of cucumbers almost daily. Like maybe every 2 to 3 days, I was getting multiple, one or two 5-gallon buckets full of cucumbers. There was no way we're going to eat that. No way. There was no way I was going to pickle that many cucumbers. I used up a lot of space doing that. And then I realized that was just way too much. I didn't have enough tomatoes. So I had to still go and buy tomatoes at the end of the season to make my sauces and my diced tomatoes for the upcoming winter. So plan your garden, plan it based around what your family eats. And in doing so, you can then now um figure out when you need to start those seeds. So for instance, tomatoes and peppers, I'm not going to start those right now. I'll probably start those closer to the beginning of March, end of February, beginning of March. Right now, I probably wouldn't start any seeds. That's just because of where I am. I'm here in Virginia. The weather is so finicky. It's no way that I will be able to go by just the average last frost date for the past few years, because it never is correct for me. And we always get a frost after that. So I will probably err on the side of caution and get something that and start somewhere between the end of February, beginning of March. Based on going just a couple of weeks past my last frost date. Last frost date. Let me define that for you all. So every year you have an estimated last frost date and an estimated first frost date. Planting your seeds after your last frost date, or planting your seedlings, if you're not direct sowing, after your last frost date will protect you from losing your investment, basically. If I was to plant a pepper plant um, before my last frost date, and then we have a freeze come through, 9 times out of 10, that pepper plant's going to die. Not all the time. There's still that 1% of the time that it maybe won't die. But do you really want to risk doing that by planting them 2, 3 weeks earlier? I wouldn't do that. So you would figure out what your last frost date is, and you can just Google it. It'll ask you, you can Google what's my last frost date, and it'll ask you to put in your zip code or something. And it'll tell you. Mine is usually like the second week of April. So I go ahead and plan for the end of April to plant my stuff out that I know is frost tender. The definition of frost tender. Frost tender just means that it's not going to last through a frost. The frost is going to kill it. Not all the time, but majority of the time. Frost hardy is the exact opposite. It will last through a frost. Frost basically meaning the temperature is dropping below freezing. So some people say a freeze. Then you have hard and soft freezes. So let's just say the temperature is 31 degrees. That's a soft freeze. It's not a hard freeze. And you may have some plants that will be frost tender but still survive. A hard freeze means it's going to be like 15 degrees outside. That's way below freezing. So 32 degrees Fahrenheit is freezing, and anything below that is a freeze. And anything that is frost tender may likely die if the temperatures reach below 32 degrees. That's all that means. Um so if I know that my last freeze is mid-April, I want to plant out the end of April, then I'm not going to start my plants until the beginning of March, end of February ish, because I know I need at least 4 to 6 weeks, more like 6 weeks for the germination period, the hardening off period, and it being safe for me to plant them outside. Hardening off. The definition of hardening off is just basically if you have started some plants inside, it has had no direct exposure to the sun or the elements outside. You don't want to just stick those plants outside. You want to give it an adjustment period, because if you take that little seedling that has been under some grow lights for the past 6 weeks, that has been in a greenhouse or in a sunroom, and there has been a barrier like a window between the sun and that plant for the last 6 weeks, if you just stick it outside right in the direct sun all day long, the sun is going to scorch those plants. So you want to give it a hardening off period where you take it outside for a couple of hours a day, get some direct sun, get some good environmental things happening, and then bring it back into its safety until it builds up a strength. And so that is hardening off. I usually have a fan that will blow on my plants while it's inside so that it's already getting that strong base. And then when I'm ready to harden it off in the sun, I have a table, a harden off table that basically butts up against my house. So in the morning, it'll get some direct sun for a couple of hours, and then the house starts to shade it. And that way I don't have to take it in and out. That's just my little trick that I learned because, again, I work a full-time job, and so I don't have time to go outside and bring all my plants back inside every day after only being outside in the sun for 2 hours. But if you have that flexibility, that's obviously an option. So if I know that I need some time to be able to start my seeds, harden them off, and then plant them in the ground, I want to make sure that I'm giving myself enough time between now or the time that I start the seeds and my last frost and when I'm going to put them in the ground. That's just the way that I do it. I know that there are some veterans out here, and I appreciate your support if you're watching me and you're thinking, what the heck is this girl talking about? Listen, I am on this journey like most people. I am one of those people that I have to learn by doing. I am not going to let someone tell me you cannot do something and it doesn't logically make sense to me. And so I need to figure out why or if I really can't do that thing. For me, this is kind of what works. And I encourage you all to do your own research and make your own decisions that fit your needs. So starting now with planning what you're going to plant, planning how much of it you're going to plant. Then you want to plan where you're going to plant it. So let me just also tell you something that I learned. When I bought my house, I think I mentioned this in the video that I posted somewhere. When I bought my house, I came out to the property before closing, and I came out multiple times of the day. like different times, not the same day, but just different times of the day each time I visited. And I wanted to see where the sun was. Now, you can just know that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west most of the time. I think I'm saying that right. I knew that the sun was going to rise up right over my backyard and it was going to set and it was going to be at the top of the yard in the middle of the day. And that was the perfect place for me to put my garden. What I did not know was the tree line. So I came out there right smack in the middle of the summer season and it was perfect. Absolutely perfect. But then when it came to me planting a fall garden, the tree line, even though in the fall most leaves fall from a tree, I have a lot of pines. If you have pines, they don't get naked. Okay. So the sun will rise a little bit more like southwest, I'm sorry, southeast, and will go right on through that tree line, and I'll never get any sun in that garden. I get like little peaks of sun throughout the fall. And then by the time it clears, that tree line is going down because the days are shorter too in the fall. So knowing where your sun will rise and fall is important when planting your garden. Okay. If you're going to be planting trellises, you want to make sure that if you're going to have tall plants, they're not going to block from the sun as well. I tend to put my tomato wall back at the back of my garden where the sun sets so that as it's rising and it's up at the top, the plants are not being shaded by my tall tomato wall. So that all comes, my mic tried to attack me. That all comes with planning. Um, Also, if you are planting annuals and perennials, if you're going to plan where you're going to plant your perennials, which the definition of perennial is basically a plant that comes back every year. Annual is a plant that you have to plant every year. So annually, you have to go and replant that plant. Perennials, it'll come back every year. If you're going to plant perennials, you want to make sure that you put it in a spot that you are positive that's where you want it to go. There are so many plants that if you want to change your mind about where it's going, you will have a hard time removing that plant from that area because the roots run so deep that you will not be able to stop that plant from coming back. Okay. I know for me, I had planted what is it? Some comfrey. And I stuck it in this bed that I knew I was going to be planting some different things in. And I was like, oh, this comfrey is really pretty. And I'm going to put it right on the end of the bed. And here we are 3 years later, and that whole bed is comfrey. I cannot get rid of that comfrey. Had I known, I would have maybe put it in its own separate area where there's a barrier. So, like maybe a circular bed or something that nothing else was going to go in. That's what I had to do with my mints and my thyme as well. So when you're planning, figure out what type of plant that is. Is it an annual or a perennial? Is it a plant that is going to overtake other plants? So I call them aggressive plants. Is it a really aggressive plant? You want to make sure you put those in areas that are not going to affect your other plants. I really wish I would have planted my comfrey by my chickens because they love comfrey and that plant gets really, really big. And so the chickens would keep it down. But you live and you learn, right? Um, Besides planting and starting seeds, another thing that you want to do now is amend your soil. If you already have gardened in that area for a number of seasons or even just for one season, just understand that the plants that you plant there are sucking the nutrients out of that space, and you have to add nutrients back to that space in most cases. So, amending your soil basically just means you're adding nutrients back to the soil. And you can do that in many different ways. I use composted cow manure. I also use compost that I try to make on my property. Sometimes I will go and get some of the chicken mess and I'll stick it in my compost bin so that it can break down that stuff and also add, because chicken mess is very high in nitrogen and nutrients that you can add to your garden. However, they are what's called a hot fertilizer. And that just means that if you stick it on your plants immediately and it has not had a chance to cool down or break down, it can burn your plants. It can over stimulate, over process. It could be too much. Okay. And so you want to give it some time for it to cool off. So sometimes that means sticking it in a compost bin. Sometimes that means putting it on your soil before like the winter and mixing it up and allowing it to break down and cool off. So sometimes I'll use that. You can use things like worm casting. Some people use liquid fertilizers. You can use fish fertilizer. I have a friend who will go fishing, and then when it's time for him to like till up his yard, he will dig a hole and stick a fresh fish in there. And that's fine too. Everybody does things differently. I don't till. I just kind of put my compost and the manure on top and kind of mix it in with my hand with some garden soil. And so I call that topping off my garden beds. And that's what I do. I'm gonna probably do that starting next week. I have to go and get some. But this is the time to amend your garden. The other thing is you might have to weed. I have lots of weeds growing all through my garden right now because I didn't do anything over the fall and winter. And so I'm going to have to go out there and pull up all those weeds. I'm going to feed them to the chickens and get started fresh. So, those are things that you can do now. And I encourage you all, get started, get dirty, go out there and play in some dirt. The weather is kind of like I said, today was 70. By the time I get home, it's going to be a little bit cooler. But tomorrow, when I get out of church, I'm hoping that the weather is going to be great and me and the girls can go out there and start working on some of these things in the garden. Make it fun, include your kids. This is something that we're trying to hand down to multiple generations to come. If you haven't had that handed down to you, you're missing out. So don't let your kids miss out. Let's get them all out there playing in that dirt, get them nice and dirty and sleepy, take them in, give them a bath, and put them to bed. Well, after they eat, but you know what I mean. So I hope you all enjoyed this episode. This was something different. I probably talked all over the place. I hope you were able to keep up. And until next time, y'all, be blessed.